Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and holy shit. Has it really been like 150 reviews that I've done? Man, I need to get myself a life or something. Well, to be serious, I'm still having a hell lot of fun doing these reviews just as much as I did when I first started doing them in 2013. And on a personal level, I've been much happier with the reviews that I have been doing since the last couple of years, where the first few that I did were pretty fucking cringy. But of course, the most important thing that really kept me going, other than me just trying to have fun, is you guys with your feedback, whether it be for the good and for the bad. Because without you guys, I have no idea where I would be. But anyways, I'm very thankful for that, and of course, for the 150th review, I want to take a look at something special, and something that a lot of people have been really wanting me to take a look at. Especially since I've reviewed the other games that are in this series, and that happens to be Koudelka on the PS1. So in case you don't know, this is the pre-successor to one of my all-time favorite RPGs called Shadow Hearts. I've already reviewed them, but I might get into a little bit of my thoughts about them later on in the video, because I got a feeling this one might be another long one. So the game was developed by Scanoff, and the publishing in this one is kinda weird. So in Japan it was published by SNK, but in North America and Europe it was published by Infogrames. But SNK's logo was still on the box, so yeah, kinda weird. But then again, having SNK publishing a game like this is just fucking weird. I mean, it's just so very different compared to everything else that they've ever done. Well, except for Athena Awakening from the Ordinary Life, which I reviewed last October, but yeah, that's a whole other story. Now, one last thing to add on to the weirdness of the publishing is that before they got Infogrames to publish it to here, they were originally going to have Electronic Arts publish it. Now, think of what you will about EA today, but back then, at least they were actually a decent company that put out good games. Well anyways, it was released in 1999 in Japan and 2000 in North America and Europe, and as you might suspect, it is indeed an RPG. And it is one of the few horror RPGs that I can think of, so with that being said, now let's get talking about the story. So the game takes place in Wales in the year 1898. So it stars our main character, Koudelka, who is a gypsy woman that happens to have a lot of psychic powers. I don't want to get too much into the backstory, but to sum it up, she pretty much grew up having a hard life. But one day, she hears a weird voice in her head calling for help, and it ends up leading her to a place called the Namton Monastery. So she travels there by horseback and ends up breaking into it, and it turns out that the monastery is severely haunted. And to make matters worse, the caretakers of the monastery are also very sketchy. And after being attacked by a giant monster, she ends up finding someone that is really badly injured, so she ends up healing him, and he turns out to be Edward. So Edward is the second playable character in your party, and despite the fact that he grew up in a rich family, he was always treated like shit. But he's the kind of person that likes to go on a lot of adventures. I guess you can say he's kind of like the Indiana Jones equivalent of the game. And then the third character that you meet is Father James, who happens to be a priest. And he always tries to see the best out of everything, because even though he's in a mansion with a bunch of dead bodies and blood everywhere, he thinks everything is just totally okay. And he also thinks that there's nothing sketchy about the caretakers either. So to sum him up, he's kind of a religious nut at times. So that's the main cast that you have here, but two other characters that I will briefly mention is Charlotte, who is a girl that died at a very young age. So she's a ghost now, and she pretty much thinks that the world sucks and everyone on it also sucks. Well, no arguments here. And finally I'll mention is Roger Bacon also makes an appearance in this game. So Roger Bacon is the only character, as far as I know, that has been in every single Shadow Hearts related game. And something else that also appears in this game, but is not a person, is the book called the Emigre Manuscript, which is a book that contains black magic that can actually raise the dead. So anyways, the main story itself is pretty typical stuff. You know, people are trapped inside a haunted mansion with a bunch of monsters and everything's trying to kill them. You know, we've all heard it all before. But the thing that really makes it great is the characters, the dialogue, and just the overall writing of it, and of course the backgrounds of the characters are also really interesting. Especially if you're someone like me who started out playing Shadow Hearts 1 before playing this one. since the character Koudelka does appear in Shadow Hearts 1 later on in the game. But she's more of a side character, where in this one, she's the main character, and all I gotta say is that she's pretty fucking awesome in this one. In fact, in a lot of ways, she kinda reminds me of Yuri with his sarcastic attitude. And the interactions between the three main characters is also pretty great. I especially really like the parts where James and Edward have debates with each other. It's really amusing. So that's pretty much all I gotta say about the story, is that it's really more character driven. Now, there is much more to the main story itself, but I don't want to get too much into it there, and yeah, I know, the game is old, but, you know, like I always say, this game is not nearly as popular as Star Wars or Final Fantasy VII. I mean, even if you haven't watched Star Wars or played Final Fantasy VII, you at least know the big dramatic events that happened within them. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. But anyways, Koudelka has the kind of story that I think is at least worth, like, experiencing in some way or another. But let's get moving on and start talking about the gameplay. So while this game is a turn-based RPG, it also does have a survival horror feel to it, and I do think this is always an interesting mixture to me. So exploring around just looks exactly like a survival horror game as you would expect at the time, and you find random ass weapons and items around the ground, and sometimes some of them are kinda easy to miss since that they do blend in with the backgrounds. And there are many letters that you can pick up and read them, so yeah, very typical survival horror stuff. And another thing that adds to the survival horror element is that this game has no currency and there's no shops in the game. So meaning that you have to be very careful and use your item inventory skills. So as for the game's battle system, this is the one thing that is very different compared to Shadow Hearts, is that instead of having a judgment ring, instead it kind of plays like a tactical RPG. So it's on a grid base where you move your characters of where you want to go, and of course whenever you get close to an enemy you get to attack them. Unless you're using a long-range weapon or magic attacks, then you have a lot of range. So the way how the grid-based battle system works in this one is a little bit different compared to most other tactical RPGs, but I can explain it with this little diagram that I made. So let's just say that you have the enemy piece that's in like the middle of the board, and then you have your player piece that's also in the middle of the board. So there is a fine line between you and where your enemies are at. So if there's other enemies on the field, they can't like go up behind you and start like attacking you from the back, or even on the side for that matter. You can only attack what's in front of you, or diagonal. So meaning that if there are other enemies on the field, they can only attack the person that's in the front line. They can't like go around them and start attacking your other characters, unless they use the range attack, of course. But that also means that you can't do the same thing to them either. So that means that this tactical gameplay style is really weird, and also, I'll be honest, I'm not really the biggest fan of it. And by the way, this is coming from someone that loves a lot of tactical RPGs, like games such as Final Fantasy Tactics, Fire Emblem, Stellar Glow, I can name a ton of others. But probably my main complaint with the battles, would have to be the fact that it's really fucking slow. For not only does it take a while to get through some of the battle animations, but even after you finish up an attack and it goes to like the enemy's turn, it still takes a little bit of loading, which is kind of annoying after a while. So yeah, a lot of the regular battles can take quite a bit of time to do, especially early on in the game when your characters are weak as shit. But later on in the game, once you do get a lot more powerful, it's not nearly as slow, but of course the loading in between attacks though is probably like the most annoying part about it all. And whenever your characters level up, you actually do gain back up your health and your MP, and you get to customize your stats by gaining 4 points each. Also, one other thing that is also kind of annoying in battle is that your weapons can actually break in this game. Now, I know for a lot of people this is a really big fucking stinker, and I can kind of agree to a point. Because yes, weapon durability in a lot of RPG games is one of the most annoying aspects in a lot of those games. But in this game, I don't think it's the worst that I've ever seen with weapon durability, but it is still one of those things that can be very frustrating, especially when you have a weapon that gains like a shitload of your stats and it just breaks and you're like, well, fuck. But the good news on side of this is that they do throw like a shitload of weapons at you, so even if you do have a bunch of weapons break on you, it is pretty easy to get some of them back. Or not only do you find them within the backgrounds, but also monsters tend to drop quite a lot of them. Also, one interesting thing about the weapons is that the weapons that you do find within the backgrounds, usually they are always going to be in the same spot, but the one thing that is really weird is that the status effects attached to that weapon will actually be different every time. For an example, when I first played this with the game footage that you're seeing here, I got the Vitality Hammer, which is a hammer that every time you attack monsters with them, you steal their health. But when I was playing this on the PS3 system, the hammer ended up having no status effect, and then it ended up being the dirk that you find at the beginning part with the painting, that ended up having the Vitality Steal ability. So yeah, it's kind of weird, but kind of interesting. It almost feels like a roguelike almost, but only that the weapons are still in the same spot. Oh yeah, and one amusing thing you can do in this game that you can't do in many others that I know is that you can actually rename the items in this game. Yeah, just for amusement, I actually renamed the Dirk to the Derp Dirk, because why not? So yeah, overall, the combat in this game is definitely going to have a very mixed reaction. So now, as for the game's controls, well, I don't really need to say much about the combat, but as for exploration, it is pretty easy to get used to, but one great feature that they have in this game is that you can actually map the button layout, so that's pretty fucking awesome. And I personally think that almost every game out there really needs to have this feature. So yeah, not much I get to say here, since, you know, the control layout really just depends on how you want to set it up, but yeah, it's really nice that we have that option. So now, let's get moving on to the other things, like the graphics. So, the graphics this time, I think are really good for the time. So like I say about a lot of games with pre-rendered backgrounds, I really do like them a lot, but as much as I do like them here and they do look nice, unfortunately I do have two complaints about them. So the first complaint is that there is some areas of the game that are a little bit too dark. Now, I know it is kind of redundant to complain about something being too dark in a horror game, but the thing is, it's kind of a problem when you don't even know, what the fuck you're supposed to be looking at sometimes, but it's just a minor thing, but it is something that is at least worth pointing out. Also, it's only in, a couple of rooms, so it's not like it's going to be an issue in, every single room you go into, thankfully, but, like I said, it is worth pointing out. And as for the second reason, and this is probably my biggest issue, is that whenever you go from one camera angle to another camera angle, it actually takes a couple seconds, and this can get kind of draining. Especially the fact that we've had other horror games that come out before this one that would change over to another camera angle almost instantly. But this one, you gotta at least wait a second or so. I know it's only 1 second, but come on, other people have done it better than this. And one extra issue, and this one goes hand in hand with this one, is that the spots that it takes you to another camera angle are kind of unpredictable, or sometimes you don't even look like you're going off screen and for some reason you just go to a different angle, and this can get kind of disorientating at times, but you do get used to it. But considering the fact that you also do gotta wait a second when it switches over to another angle, it's ugh. So as much as I do like the way how the game looks, it is unfortunate that the camera angles are not the best functioning ever, but it's definitely not the worst that I've seen. I mean, this is at least way better than the Crow City of Angels, good fucking god. But anyways, as for the other stuff, like the character designs and the 3D models of it, I do think it all looks really good, and also the enemy designs of this game are also really creepy and fucking weird as shit, and some of them are actually pretty recognizable too. For an example, like this upside down hanging man with the gun does reappear within the first Shadow Hearts game, so kinda interesting where they got that enemy from. So now, let's get moving on and start talking about the music. So the music in this game, for me personally, I really do like it a lot. But as much as I do like it, unfortunately there's not a lot of songs within the game because most of it usually plays within battle themes and of course certain cutscenes. But the very few songs that they do have, I do think they are really good sounding, and I do find a lot of them do fit the tone pretty well. But when you're exploring around, there's really no music at all. It's usually just random sound effects and atmospheric stuff, which I do think works really well. But it would have been pretty cool if we got some more recognizable themes, but I do get what they're trying to go for here, and I do think it does work good. Also, I just have to mention, but the opening theme song to this game almost sounds a lot like the Shadow Moses theme from Metal Gear 1. You know, the best is yet to come. Yeah, so that's fucking awesome right there. So yeah, the music in this one, I really do like it a lot. So now, as for the game's voice acting, now you'd be surprised, but the voice acting in this game is not only really fucking good, but even for back in like the PS1 days of voice acting, this is probably like one of the best voice acting roles I ever heard on a PS1 game. Hell, I'm not even kidding. I think it's just as good as Metal Gear 1's voice acting. But it is unfortunate that the voice actors for the three main characters never really had much of a career, because they did a really damn good job with this one, and it would have been really cool to hear more other stuff that they would have worked on. But I'm just here to tell you that I think they did a great job with fitting the roles of the characters and really made them feel more alive. And one other thing that is interesting is that the voice for Roger Bacon in this game is probably like the best voice casting for that character within the series. It kinda sucks that they never brought that guy back for doing the other Shadow Hearts games, because unfortunately, his voice with the other games just kept getting worse and worse. But probably the only well-known actor that I know of that is in this game is the voice of Charlotte, who is voiced by Sarah Paxton, who has done many different movies and television shows, so that's pretty cool. In fact, when she voice casted for this role, she was only 12 years old at the time, so yeah, that's pretty damn good for a 12-year-old. So yeah, definitely the most impressive part about the game for me is that the voice acting is definitely one of the most top-notch things you ever hear from a PS1 game.
Good rations. Let's take some with us.
I can't believe it. Are you still hungry?
I didn't have anything to eat or drink for 3 days. Of course I'm hungry. Speaking of which, you wasted all of that food. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. If it weren't poisoned, then I would have had some.
Pardon?
I said, if the soup weren't poisoned, then I would have had some. Got it?
Poisoned? No way.
Just a little bit. I smelled some poisonous plant.
What's happening?
Oh, I can tell you how you're going to feel. In about half an hour, you won't be able to move your body. If you don't find an antidote, you'll definitely die.
So they really were trying to kill us. But why?
Don't know. But it seems they're quite used to doing it this way. They must be hiding something. Listen, Edward. I'm going to try to cure you now. But you have to promise that when I do, you won't get mad and rush back to that couple right away. It's safer if we pretend we're dead and continue exploring this building. I think we'll find something interesting for sure.
They're all liars and thieves anyway. This is still a monastery. This is still God's house, prison or no. Why all those liars and heathens are killed is none of my concern.
How could you possibly say a thing like that? That doesn't sound very priestly.
I am not a priest. I am a bishop.
I don't give a rat's ass what you are. Look, I'm not saying that all of those people were saints, okay? But that doesn't mean that they should be put to death.
You saw that old couple. They're so well-mannered, kind. You think they're killers?
Good manners?
Yes.
Think about it! Why would they leave the place such a mess?
I don't know.
You think they'd at least bury the body?
Possibly.
Anyway, I have this strange feeling we're not alone with all these bodies and ghosts. You'd better keep your mouths shut. If you want to live.
Because I'm sure as you know, but there's a lot of PS1 games with voice acting that is just really fucking bad, but at least they are really amusing, where this one is just really well done. So now, if you want to go out and buy this game, well, unfortunately, out of all the games within the Shadow Hearts series, this one is the most expensive. So the cheapest I've seen it for was $70, and the highest I've seen it for was $130. Well, shit, Lamart, it seems like this one has gone up a bit more than the last time I've seen it around. So that's really unfortunate, but at least there is other options out there to play this one. But it would always be nice to have that PSN release, but I don't think that's ever gonna happen due to the fact that Scanoff is not around anymore, which fucking sucks. But speaking of platforms, one random thing that I found out about is that Koudelka was also gonna have a Neo Geo Pocket Color release, but it was early on scrapped. That could have been really interesting, considering that Scanof's first game was also on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, and that was Paisley, or I don't know how it's pronounced, but you're looking at it right now. So now, as for my overall thoughts on this game, so for someone like myself that considers Shadow Hearts 1 and 2 to be some of the best RPGs that you can play, unfortunately, I don't think Koudelka is not nearly as good as that. But as a game on its own, I do think the game is for the most part good, but I don't think it's great, and I don't think it's amazing either. And the biggest problem with the game is really the battle system and some of the weird stuff that goes on with the camera angles of the game. So just like I said, the battles are just slow, and also as a tactical RPG, they're just not that refined. And as for the camera angles, they just have like a couple of weird issues that just seem kind of weird for a game like this to be released in 2000 to have, considering that we've had many survival horror games come up before this that did not have these issues, so yeah, that's another big reason. But other than that, I do think this game is at the very least enjoyable, especially if you have played the other Shadow Hearts games. Because the story in this one is really damn good, and I do consider it to be almost as good as the first Shadow Hearts game. And just like I said about the voice acting, it's really damn impressive for the time. It's very much ahead of its time. Hell, I'd actually say it's even better than the voice acting within the first Shadow Hearts. And also there's like way more of it, so much more of it, that the game is actually on 4 different discs. Yeah, this game is actually not that long of an RPG, but the game is on 4 discs because of the amount of like cutscenes and voices that they have. But as much stuff about Koudelka that I do really like, unfortunately, overall, I do think it is the weakest one in the Shadow Hearts series. I know that may seem a bit blasphemy to say because I know the third game is a piece of shit, but here's the thing though. As you've seen in my review for Shadow Hearts From the New World, that game's gameplay was actually really good. It just had a shit story with really lame characters that were really like cringy and for the most part unfunny. But the gameplay in it was still really good, where this one's gameplay I do feel is definitely not nearly as good as any of the other games, but I do think that the story and the music and all the other aspects that I've already mentioned are really great stuff. So because of this, it's really hard to recommend this game for that, you know, tactical RPG battle systems are definitely not for everyone. But I do think that the game is at the very least worth playing through if you are a fan of Shadow Hearts, mostly due to the game's story and lore. But one last thing I will say about this game is that it's one of those games where it starts out really rough, really annoying, and you think that this game is just gonna be really tedious as fuck, but then you realize that the farther you get through the game, the easier it gets, and the more you get used to it, and then the more you get engaged into the story, and then after you beat it and see the ending climax, you're like, wow, that was actually really good. So yeah, it's one of those games where the farther you get through it, the better it gets. And as I already said, this is not going to be a game for everyone, but I do think it is at least worth a try if you are a fan of horror games and if you are a fan of the Shadow Hearts series especially. It just really makes me wish that this game had like a full-on remake where they changed the battle system to play more like the Shadow Hearts series with the Judgment Ring ability. Man, that would be like the greatest shit ever. But I can dream that one day it might happen. Well, anyways, that's all I have to say about Koudelka is that it is a pretty good game, but it does start out really rough, but does get better each time. But anyways, with that being said, thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.
Oh no!